you want to make yourself so valuable to the organization, they couldn't, imagine you not on the team, right? And they want to find more ways for you to lean into your strengths and bring that unique, special sauce that you have. And I think that that's one of those things that folks are not really trained or taught at an early age, that you should always be trying to demonstrate your unique value. Part of the challenge for folks with non-dominant identities as well is that you're so busy trying to fit in that you don't want to stand out in some ways. And so that's not, maximizing the value of the diversity that you are bringing to whatever organizational environment you're working in.
Hello and welcome to Growing Through It, your go-to podcast for real leadership stories. I'm your host, Jen Arnold. In every episode, you'll hear straight talk from leaders who face their own challenges. We'll dive into those whoops moments and the insights that followed. This podcast is about the lessons that refine us, shared to help you confidently lead in your own style. Whether you're looking to steer your team towards success or just seeking a spark of inspiration, you're in the right place. Let's grow through it together. Dr. Ella Washington, welcome to the Growing Through It podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Thank you for having me. What a pleasure to be back with you, Jen.
Yeah, and you were a three-peat, I do believe, in the two different podcasts. You've been on a little bit, and I am thankful that you fitted in during your Unspoken book tour. But before we dive into the book, I'm going to ask you a prompt, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about you from a personal perspective. But the prompt is, if you really knew me, you would know that.
That I love to travel. I do my best thinking when I'm on a plane, which may sound counterintuitive, but I enjoy the lack of Wi-Fi sometimes and the lack of connectivity. It just helps me to really disconnect, and it often coalesces thoughts that have been in my head, but I haven't had quiet moments. So for me, travel gives a lot of quiet moments. Some of my favorite places have been on the continent of Africa. So I love South Africa. I love West Africa. But I've also enjoyed going other places like South America and Colombia and South America, and other places like that. Basically, if it has a body of water and it's warmer climate, I'm probably happy there.
How many countries have you been to? Have you lost count?
I have been to 41 countries.
41 countries. Wow. And any trips on the horizon this year? Any more?
Well, not this year. Not this year. This year, I'm focused on promoting my book, Unspoken. And I know we'll get into that, but hopefully early next year, I'll have some more personal travel.
All right. Well, I will live vicariously through you. All right. Because right now, I'm not going anywhere. All right. Now, Ella, introduce yourself from a professional perspective now.
I am Dr. Ella F. Washington. I'm an organizational psychologist by education, and I have worked in the field of workplace culture, organizational behavior my entire career. My mission in the work that I do is to elevate humanity in the workplace. And so I work with leaders and individuals alike, as well as teams, to help them understand how to implement a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable culture in their organizations.
And this is your second book, Unspoken. And, I put on LinkedIn, I feel like this was the book that I needed when I was 20 years old, 25, coming into corporate America, and I didn't get it. I know.
That's the most feedback I've gotten. That is the most common feedback I've gotten from more senior folks, is that I wish I had this book, right after college or as I was starting this job. And that's probably my favorite piece of feedback, because to me, that means I got something right. And it also hopefully signals to that person that's feeling that to share the resource with a early career professional, so that they don't maybe have to navigate things in the same challenging ways that we did, X years ago.
Yeah. And it's funny because my dad was a corporate director. He retired there, but for some reason it never translated. My mom was never in the corporate world. But it never translated to me. It wasn't like, hey, Jen, here's the rules of the road, right? So I walked into it with this put your head down, work hard, get seen mentality, which is the opposite of your advice. But of course, hard work is in there. But there's unspoken rules in any company you work in. When did you first realize in your career that, okay, I can only work so hard and it's not paying off, or that you maybe noticed things were unspoken?
Well, I think I had the benefit of being exposed to the 40 years of research around race and gender and other non-dominant identities in the workplace. And so when I went into the workplace, I had that breadth of knowledge of what the research has shown about, women having to work twice as hard, or folks from non-dominant identities being assumed to not be competent and having to prove and reprove their competence. And so when I started noticing these things for myself in the workplace, in my first job at a Big Four consulting firm, I wasn't surprised. It feels different, experiencing it than reading it on an academic article. But unlike most people who have no idea, especially those who buy into the myth of meritocracy, you think you go into an organization, you work really hard, and then you will automatically see results. And that is best case scenario. But there are so many complexities that happen because of human nature, because of bias that all humans have, and because of systemic inequalities and inequities that can have an impact on someone's experience in the workplace. And so all of that kind of comes into play.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you wrote it for someone like me, a white woman going in, because you did mention that there's, of course, inequity with women, but then you have, the non-dominant identities that you mentioned throughout. So how are unspoken rules different, like for people of the non-dominant identities?
Yeah, and so I was really specific to say non-dominant identities because really this book is for anyone that has ever felt othered in the workplace. And it can be because of your race or your gender or your socioeconomic status, or it can be for many other reasons. Maybe you're neurodivergent. Maybe, you had just an exclusionary experience in the workplace. And while, most folks of non-dominant identities would not be considered white men, it's for them too, right? Because we can all have these experiences of being othered in the workplace. So that's who I wrote the book for. And if you think about it, we could all, benefit from the advice shared. And so hopefully that makes people feel seen when they read, about these unspoken rules in the workplace. But certainly the research is really clear for women and people of color and people in the LGBTQ community that we absolutely experience these unspoken rules of navigating the workplace.
Yes. And, you talked in the book about people who have made it, people who have gotten past it all, person of color, woman, all of the above. But instead of handing over what you call the cheat codes, it's more like, oh, sorry, you just have to have go down the same road I went down, and it has to be hard for you too. Why is that? Where does that come from?
Oh, I think it's part of human nature again. Unfortunately, we're flawed humans, right? But
I
part of
guess.
it is that many of us, we have this sense of if I had to work hard, the next person should have to work hard too. One, because it's only fair, and I'm using my quotation marks fair because, fairness is relative. But two, some people really feel like going through those experiences builds grit and builds resilience in a way that is needed and necessary for success. And so I don't think it's all from a negative place. However, the challenge is that, navigating the workplace is already difficult enough, right? And so having these extra layers of challenge of these unspoken rules just makes it that much more difficult. And the advice that I give in my book is not one of, if you know these things won't be challenging. You won't have, things that you have to show grit and resilience through, but let it not be those things that make the playing field uneven. Let it not be those things that there are the informal rules. Let it be the actual hard work and not navigating these unspoken things. And so I think that, we're this vicious cycle a lot of times of if I had to work hard and do this or, get hazed a little bit, you should too. And I hope that we can break that cycle, particularly when it comes to these unspoken rules.
Yeah, I like that you're saying separate the, like, let them do hard work. You're not saying, hey, go give them the test, right? The answers to the test, but you're saying, hey, here's how to navigate this person, this meeting, this more of those unspoken things that are going to happen. The politics, right? Why not help somebody out with the politics? Because you don't know what you're walking into.
And then there'll be some things that you can't help someone navigate, right? Like we all have our own journeys that no matter how prepared you are, you will have to navigate something in your personal life, in your work life, and they're intertwined in many ways, right? And so, it's not about the person not, again, having grit and resilience, but it's like if you can make it easier for the next person to not have to deal with some of those same things that maybe held you back or almost held you back, then why not pay it forward? I mean, for me, that's part of my mission to elevate humanity in the workplace is by paying it forward. And I know that I wouldn't be where I am in my career if folks hadn't paid it forward for me, and tenfold over, as far as sharing with me the unspoken rules, both in the academic and corporate spaces. I'm so grateful for all the folks who did. And again, I just hope to encourage more people to do that through what I write about in my book.
Did you have people that actively helped you? I know you tell a story in the book about someone who left their role and put your name in the hat, that type situation. But considering you've had different corporate roles and then in higher education, which is a whole different ballgame, did you have someone pull you aside and help you? Or was it you reaching out and asking, or maybe a mix of both?
In the grand scheme of things, I would say it was a mix of both. But by and large, I mean, I had so many people helping me out, putting down the rope after they've climbed up it, if you will, in countless scenarios, whether they, just help connect me with somebody in my new organization, or they pulled me aside and gave me feedback like, yeah, that presentation wasn't great, and this is how you can make it better. So I am really grateful through my years that people did pull me aside to help lift me up ultimately.
Yeah, more of that overall. Candid feedback to help people grow, right? Not out of criticism, but really just helping them excel.
Absolutely.
Now, code switching. That was a new term for me. I've never heard that term before. Yeah, like where have I been, right? Explain for the audience what it is.
Yeah. Well, you're not alone, Jen, first of all. It's when you do this work every day, sometimes you forget that is common nomenclature for someone who is deep in the organizational behavior or management literature, maybe new for someone else. I've even had talks where I experienced people saying, I have been code switching my whole career, but I never had a term for it. So, Jen, you're not alone.
Okay, thank you for that, Ella.
um, Code switching is anything that you are doing to downplay any part of your identity or who you are for the sake of making those in the dominant culture feel comfortable. And so what that generally looks like in a workplace organization is people changing their style of dress or their hair or what food they bring to not, be too ethnic in the food that they're bringing. I mean, code switching can be so many different things. It can be behavioral. It can be the things that we wear, our physical appearance. It can even be things like our dialect, like words that we use with people we feel more comfortable with versus how we speak in the workplace. Code switching can be a lot of things, but ultimately it's shifting some part of yourself in order to make other people feel more comfortable. Not because you necessarily want to, but because you feel like you have to do that in order to either be accepted and or to excel.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I was reading it and I was like, oh, that sounds, yeah, we've all done it. Definitely. You're trying to fit in and be the part, right? I remember I worked in insurance and I knew I had to show up in this suit and it had to be a certain kind of suit, right? Like, I think I wore a brown suit one day and everyone wore a black suit, like something ridiculous like that. And it's like, oh, I kind of stand out. As silly as that is. But then you go on to talk in the book about, hey, sometimes you can use it for strategically, I think is the way you put it. So, how do you know whether code switching is something that is slowly killing your soul, right? That is, you're putting that mask on and it's draining you versus, hey, I'm going to do this from a strategic standpoint to get ahead without losing my soul?
It takes self-awareness and self-reflection. Many folks who have code switched, they've done it their whole lives. Whether it's how you were socialized as a child or something you've just done naturally in order to fit in. And as you allude to, it is kind of human nature to want to fit in.
Mhm.
However, when you take a step back and you realize, like, hey, I am doing this not because I want to, and I actually don't feel good about it, but I'm doing it solely to fit in because I don't feel like the folks in this organization really will accept me for who I am. That is where you want to pause and think about, are you comfortable engaging in code switching in that particular way? Or are you not comfortable and you want to pivot differently? Anytime I post on LinkedIn about code switching, it gets people up in arms because some people feel really adamant that I should never have to code switch. And I agree that you shouldn't have to code switch. However, the reality of the workplace is that sometimes you do have to code switch if you want to navigate that workplace. But by being aware of your propensity to code switch, the habits that you have around it, you can make a strategic decision. Like, yes, this is something that I want to do, or no, I am not comfortable. This work environment is not for me, and it's time for me to make a change. And I am of the belief that neither one of those are wrong. But I do think when knowledge is power, and so even that self knowledge of understanding that you're doing something and then investigating why you're doing that thing can get you closer to that authentic workplace relationship that hopefully most of us can achieve at some point.
Do you think that there are environments where people, especially people of color, don't ever have to code switch? Or do you feel like it's just, I know you said it's kind of it is a reality for most workplaces, but do those workplaces, that workplace utopia you talk about, does that exist?
Oh, yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, I've talked to folks that are in all different types of organizations, and they say, I don't feel like I have to code switch in this organization. And that's a great feeling. I do think that workplace utopia can exist when you have an organization and leadership committed to creating environments where everyone is valued for who they are, and that the environment is set up for everyone to be able to thrive in their own strengths. And part of what that requires is transparency around what success actually looks like, right? And not these informal or unspoken rules. Environments that have a whole bunch of informal, unspoken rules, those are generally not the environments where people are able to achieve that workplace utopia. So absolutely, it does exist, and it exists in all different types of organizations, but it's based on that organization really being committed to that culture of inclusion that we talk about, but it's often hard to really create.
Yeah, well, that's good news. And that should be a nice review, right? You can just show up as yourself there, regardless of who you are or what you believe in. You can just be yourself. I don't think there's enough of that.
I agree.
All right. In the book, you talked about having receipts. And that was, I call it, CYA. But there is this sense of keeping a paper trail, an email trail, versus, okay, I'm just going to do my job. So like what percent of your energy needs to be spent keeping that electronic trail? You know what I mean? Versus just doing your job. And maybe I'm saying that as from a place of, being a white woman. I don't know, but you know what I mean? Like how much energy do you put into that?
Well, you certainly don't want to have to be on the defensive all the time, right? So I'm certainly not suggesting that every single meeting have to have this file of everything that, went on. However, the good thing about email is that there's often a paper trail, a natural paper trail anyways. But what I am talking about in the book is specifically, when you are noticing a shift or when you've noticed that there might be some informal or unspoken rules going on, make sure you do your due diligence to, record the conversation. So, Jen, we had a great meeting today. Thank you for walking me through that feedback on my presentation last week. I look forward to the next steps that we agreed upon. So that's just a good business practice anyways. However, it also is a form of receipts that we, had this conversation, we had a move forward plan, and that we're going to reconnect. And so most of the times keeping your receipts, quote unquote, is not doing something that's not just a good business practice in general, but you want to do it with awareness, especially again, if you're feeling a shift or you're unsure of kind of where you stand with your team members.
How do you know when to pull out the receipts? Because I've had people throw me under the bus in a meeting that was not warranted, right? It's like they said, oh, yeah, we told you about this. It's like, no, you never did. So it's happened to me, but I never know when is the right time to say, okay, is it that shift? I mean, it was a shift in how that person acted towards me because they were, kind of performing in front of higher level people. But how do
Um,
you know when?
That's a great question. I don't know that I have a perfect answer for that. I think it's a little bit of your gut. What does your gut tell you? But a clear signal to me would be if my competence was being challenged, or if there were any challenges to what actually happened, like factually, like did you send this report to the client, or did you follow through on what you said you were going to do? I think anytime those two things are in question, I'd likely pull out the receipts. And listen, you can do it in a way that doesn't have to be contentious, right? You can say, hey, I'm just, returning our attention to this email that I sent on June 1st. Hopefully this can give more clarity to the conversation, right? And so, sure, someone may take that offensively, but ultimately, if you are trying to provide clarity and that provides the clarity, then we should all want the same thing. And so, while I don't think you should provide receipts every single turn, right? You still want to navigate the human side of the relationship and not be defensive. I think it's absolutely appropriate to include it as information that can provide clarity and context to maybe a challenging situation happening.
I like the way you put that, Ella.
So sometimes it's about how you say it, not what you say, right?
Oh,
And we talk about that a lot in the book. It's like you could send an angry email and say, I'm providing these receipts because you all are wrong and I'm right, right? Or you could say, hey, there seems to be some confusion. I'd like to provide some clarity by sharing, the information that I have from X date, right? Same outcome, different approach, and hopefully different reception by the audience.
yeah, it is all in the way you say it, how you bring it up. And then the other thing that you had in the book, and I was actually doing an emotional intelligence training, and this came up too, is reading the room. Oh man, how many times have I seen someone go into a meeting and they're not seeing the signs and they're just charging forward and it is uncomfortable. Or a recent call I was on, and it's a group of women, just for some context, and it's a board that I'm on, and a woman said, "Honey, you can't bring that up," in a very condescending tone. All of us, the tone, everything shifted. She did not bat an eye that lady, the other person that she was being condescending to, hurt her feeling, like just complete shift. She could not read that room. So, especially for people who are a little lacking in that area, or people who just don't realize reading the room is important. What are the first steps, like when they go into it?
Well, it's one of my favorite chapters in the book because it's something that people never actually talk to me about. Is this read the room? It's kind of something you pick up over time, right? And what I am encouraging the readers of Unspoken to do is know that this is something that you should be doing, right? And proactively do it. And a lot of times that's just making sure that you are listening and observing instead of, like you said, charging forward, with blinders on, right? Because reading the room is about understanding the politics and power and influence dynamics within a organization and situation. And it's also about understanding personalities, right? And how things actually get done within an organization. And so, reading the room is one of those things that I still work on. I think we all have to continue to work on that because it's so contextually dependent. However, I think it's one of those skills that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah, and I think it also is influenced by how we are showing up, right? So if we're rushing from meeting to meeting, or we didn't get a lot of sleep last night, or if we're just in our own heads, we can miss that, or we're just not even paying attention because we're just not in the right, mindset.
Yeah, and I mean, I think those folks who lack emotional intelligence, like the example that you gave, they should spend more time reading the room, right? Maybe they need to spend more time observing versus charging forward. But again, we all have emotional intelligence work to do. And reading the room is something that you'll always have to do. It gets a bit easier once okay, I've seen this before. I've experienced this before. So early in your career, it may be a little more difficult. But I think that sense of awareness that the first thing I should be doing in any new environment is observing, as opposed to, some of us, myself included, have been under the mindset that, because maybe I am a minority entering this all male or all white space, or maybe I'm the only one representing my group, that I have to immediately show my competence. And, I talk about that in the book. And that is a situation where, again, there may be shifting standards or higher standards for you. But even if that's the case, you don't want to jump in and, be the first to raise your hand. Look around the room first and do some observations before you do that.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, that sometimes you feel like you need to be the first one to speak so people know you're competent. And you brought up the standards. And also you talked about standards of excellence in there. So I have a question on this, but for the listeners, define what standards of excellence mean.
So when I talk about in Unspoken, your personal standard of excellence, it's not about what other people think of you. It's you and how you consider your very best performance, especially in the workplace in this context, right? So what does it take for you to be at your very best? When you've gotten enough sleep, when you've eaten the right meals, when you've prepared adequately for a meeting or a presentation, right? All of us know when we've done our very best. And that best may not be the same every day, right? Sometimes we only have 70% to give. So that may be all you have to give. But you also know, if you're being honest with yourself, when you didn't study for that exam or you didn't review the pitch deck before you went into the meetings. I mean, we all know when we've fallen short, right? Because no one's perfect. However, when you think about your own personal standard of excellence, it should be that level that you're showing up at your best 95% of the time. And while external standards of performance can influence what that excellence looks like, if your organization expects XYZ, you showing up in that way may be part of your standard of excellence. But again, it's not about how someone else judges you. It's about you being honest with yourself and saying, did I give my very best? And if you did, you can be proud. And if you didn't, then, there's some area of opportunity.
So one of the things that made me think of is that it feels like in general, maybe it's just the people I follow on social, but it feels like there's this general, like, I'm not doing any extra for the man. Like they're going to get what they get and I'm not going to go above and beyond. So I'm guessing you can still have personal standards of excellence and then have boundaries too. But what's the relationship between maybe, I don't know if it's how hard you work, how much you work, but I think there is this feeling not to do extra when I think a lot of the unspoken rules in corporate are to do extra.
Oh, yeah. Well, I also think there's a difference between doing extra work or things that are beyond your scope of work and things that are actually a part of your job but that you may not realize are a part of your job. So for example, I talk about in the book how networking is actually a part of your job if you want to navigate the workplace and build your networks of influence, right? So I used to think early in my career that, networking, I only need to do that when I need a new job. And I certainly wasn't thinking about internal networking as being important. But now I know for a fact, your internal network must be strong for not only you to be recognized and seen for the value that you're bringing, but also so you can get things done. So you know how to operate and navigate, these organizational environments. Your external network is also extremely important. But in general, networking is actually part of your job. It's part of your professional development. And so it's not actually extra work. And I used to think that it was, but you really shouldn't think of that as extra work. Now, I am a believer that, if you are doing someone else's job or you're doing things way outside of your job responsibilities, that should engender a conversation with management. Like, hey, maybe we need to revisit my scope, and maybe that also revisits compensation or level, et cetera, right? Or, we need to make sure we hire someone soon. I know this position has been vacant for 6 months. Are we planning to hire, or do we need to make some additional shifts, right? So I do think it's appropriate to have that conversation if you find yourself doing extra work all the time, right? But I think there is a balancing act between, being a team player and doing work consistently that is extra and beyond the scope of your job responsibilities. And I think for especially those young professionals that are like, well, where is the line for that? I think it can always be a good conversation with your manager. Like, hey, I've noticed I've been pulled onto these projects, really frequently. I'd love to discuss, is that something I should consider a regular part of my job responsibilities? Or is it just because this team member, has been out or et cetera. I think transparency and clarity can only help both sides of that professional relationship.
Yeah, and it's asking the question and not just sitting there miserable about doing all the extra things and getting really annoyed and resentful. With that?
Yeah, that the opposite is protesting, right? Saying, "Oh, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just not going to do it because it seems like it's extra, and I'm not doing that." And while that may feel good in the moment, it will have negative impacts on how you're perceived and likely your ability to continue to excel in that organization. And for the folks that are like, well, that's okay with me, maybe that is okay with you, totally fine. But for folks that actually do want to excel in their careers and keep climbing in that organizational environment, it is important to be seen as a team player. And so I'm not advocating for, work beyond your scope of responsibilities. I'm absolutely advocating for transparency in the conversation with your management.
Yeah, and it is, again, all in how you say it, all in how you bring it up. But is there anything aside from networking that you feel like networking is part of your job, but it's an unspoken rule? Is there anything else that would fall kind of in that same category for people to be aware of?
I think that finding ways to highlight your niche and add unique value is something that is also part of your job that doesn't really get talked about, particularly as you excel to higher levels within your career. But even, as a early career professional, you want to make yourself so valuable to the organization they couldn't, imagine you not on the team, right? And they want to find more ways for you to lean into your strengths and bring that unique special sauce that you have. And I think that that's one of those things that folks are not really trained or taught at an early age, that you should always be trying to demonstrate your unique value. Part of the challenge for folks with non-dominant identities as well is that you're so busy trying to fit in that you don't want to stand out in some ways. And so that's not, maximizing the value of the diversity that you are bringing to whatever organizational environment you're working in.
That's a really, really good point. But it's such a unique perspective that you're trying to fit in, yet there are pieces of you that needs to be seen that can help you stand apart in a way that the company can see as, oh, this person's beneficial to the organization.
Research actually supports what you just said, that we all as humans have this underlying need when it comes to feeling included on a team. We have this tension between wanting to feel valued for what we're uniquely bringing to a team and also wanting to fit in as part of the team. And the research that dives into this is really clear that there needs to be a balance between that uniqueness and those feelings of belongingness. When you swing too far on one side, you have people that feel like they have to assimilate. So they have to, diminish all of their identity and all of their authenticity to fit in with the dominant group. On the other side, you may feel tokenized or singled out for those unique characteristics and experiences if there's not a balance between feeling valued for who you are and what you're bringing to the team, and those unique strengths you have, and that larger sense of belonging. So that tension absolutely exists. And on the best teams, folks figure out how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a tricky spot to be in from the employee's perspective. One of the things you talked about in negotiations, you said you love negotiations. Have you always loved to negotiate?
I think so. And I think the more you learn the tools of negotiations, most people actually like it once they learn the tools of how to navigate these conversations. So I think most people love it once they know how to do it.
Yeah, well, ask my 11-year-old. He is brilliant at it. He does it every time, and he's
For
good. And I
him.
don't want him to lose that part of it, right? I've always, in my experience, the best promotion I've ever gotten was when I go to a new organization. And then when I'm within an organization, you don't quite get as big of a bump in salary unless you go to maybe a leadership role. But what are other forms of negotiation that people should consider outside of salary? Because that's the most common one people think of.
Well, one, there's so many non-salary elements of a new contract that you can negotiate, from, travel reimbursement to pay time off to other benefits like childcare reimbursement, or transportation reimbursement when you take the metro, or what have you. Like, there's so many different things that are actually not salary related that you can negotiate on the front end of a new job. But also, once you get in the job, the negotiation should continue. And so people often think of performance reviews as a report card, where it's something you get at the end of a performance cycle, and the grade is the grade, right? And I want to push back on that idea and think about your performance review as a conversation, even a negotiation, right? And part of that is framing your value add in the organization as a win-win, like you should do in all negotiations. So what have you done to enhance the team and the organization? What are those unique skills and attributes that you're bringing that you want to highlight? But also, this negotiation doesn't start, when it's time for that annual review. It actually starts, throughout the whole year, where you should be having this ongoing conversation about management's goals for you and what you're bringing to the table and how you're delivering on those goals. And so when you think about most experiences as a negotiation that should be framed in a win-win perspective, you can start to see the other areas of opportunity for negotiation within your career.
Yes. I love that, thinking of a performance review as a as a negotiation, because I never would have thought that way. So I know at the beginning you said a lot of people give you the compliment I gave you. It's like, this is the book I needed 20 years ago. But are there some top, we'll call them cheat codes, that people have said that they picked up from the book?
I think the chapters on your identity and navigating that, and figuring out who you are and how you want to show up in the workplace, particularly on the topic of code switching, has been something that a lot of folks have really said resonated with them, as well as what we just talked about, the chapter on negotiations. I mean, so many people are fearful of negotiations. They feel like they're not good at negotiations. Most people actually aren't good at negotiations naturally, but it is a skill like anything else that you can learn. And once you learn the skill and practice that skill, I think anybody can be good at negotiations. And so those are the things that I have most often heard as feedback for Unspoken.
And is there anything that I didn't ask you about the book or about unspoken rules in general that you want to leave the listeners with?
I would highlight that there's two kind of pathways that I'm talking about in this book. And the second pathway has come from after I wrote it, the conversations I've had. And so I think there's the unspoken rules in the workplace, but then I think there's also the unspoken conversations. And what I mean by that is those things that, we're fearful to talk about at all. And so they often don't get said, especially when it comes to experiences of things like microaggressions, or experiences of burnout, or other things or harassment, those things that we don't give enough voice and space to, that have really showed themselves to be part of the important dialogue of what I tackle in this book. And so I encourage all of us to speak the unspoken, whether it's highlighting those informal and unspoken rules, or it's giving voice to those uncomfortable conversations that can actually, really have an impact on someone's well-being, their workplace experience, and, even their life.
Yes. And I think for me, and maybe it's just because I'm older, but at first I was really kind of annoyed that there were unspoken rules. I didn't feel like it was fair, that there was politics, office politics and power and influence. And then I had to get over it because it is a reality that we're in. And if you work with people, so even as an entrepreneur, right, you work with people, that you need to know that there's politics and that there are unspoken rules, and you can be mad about it, or you can maybe speak it out loud or have the conversations about it, because they do exist. And I'm glad that you wrote a book about it.
It's one of those things. I too have been angry at different points in my career. Like, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to work twice as hard? Why do I have to over explain myself? Why? And, it's fair to feel that way. However, if you decide to move forward in navigating these workplaces, especially corporate workplaces, but part of the feedback I've gotten is that all workplaces kind of fit into these unspoken rules. You got to understand that everything is not fair. Like your mom always said, life is not fair. Maybe this is that dose of that medicine. It's like, okay, life is not fair. And those of us in positions of power absolutely can, again, help make things better for the next generation by not only speaking these unspoken rules, but also by changing the systems as we have the ability to do that, right? And so I would encourage someone to not give up hope once you recognize that these unspoken rules exist. Hopefully my book Unspoken will give you tools to navigate the spaces, but also realize that you can have a positive impact. You may be able to change things for the folks coming behind you.
Yes. Well, Ella, where can people find out more about you?
You can find out about my work at my website, Ella F. Washington. That's EllaFWashington.com. So EllaFWashington.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Same phrase, Ella F. Washington. And I'd love to connect with our listeners.
All right. Well, I will link that up in the show notes. And Ella, thank you for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jen. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining us on Growing Through It. I'm Jen Arnold, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. If today's story sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and share it with your fellow leaders. And remember, each episode comes with a nugget of wisdom that we expand on in our newsletter. So if you're eager to put these insights into action, head over to our website at growthsignals.co and sign up for exclusive content that'll give you an edge in your leadership journey. Keep growing, and I'll connect with you again soon in our next episode. Until then, take the lessons learned and lead authentically.